That region of the world called Southeast Asia is also known as the Indo-Chinese Peninsula. It lies between India and China.
Beginning in the 19th century, a new wave of Western colonization took place, this time not in America but in Asia and Africa. While Europeans had set up colonies and trading posts in these regions before, the imperialism of the 1880s was different. European countries now wanted total control over their new colonies. The colonization of the 19th century was fueled by economic, political, social, and religious reasons. Capitalist states looked for new sources of rubber, oil, and tin for their industries. Further than that, colonies were symbols of national prestige, and for the European countries who were intense rivalries, having colonies meant an advantage over their enemies. Imperialism was also tied to racism and social Darwinism. Colonists believed that they were genetically and culturally superior to the people of Southeast Asia. Other European colonists believed it was the, quote, white man's burden to spread Christianity, Western democracy, or capitalism to the rest of the world.
Examples of new imperialism were evident in the Southeast Asia. In 1800, the Europeans ruled over two societies in the area, the Spanish Philippines and the Dutch East Indies. By the 1900s, virtually the entire area was under Western rule. The process of colonial rule began with the country that made the Industrial Revolution possible, Great Britain. In 1819, Great Britain sent Sir Thomas Stanford Raffles to found a new colony on a small island at the tip of the Malay Peninsula called Singapore, also known as the City of the Lion. During the next few decades, the British advanced into Southeast Asia. Next to fall was the Kingdom of Burma. Britain wanted to control all of Burma in order to protect its possessions in India to obtain a land route through Burma and southern China. British activities in Burma led to the collapse of the Burmese monarchy, and it soon established the control over the entire country.
Various missionaries sent by the French were operating in Vietnam. In fear of the British making any improvements in routing through Burma, the local authorities despised Christianity, as it threatened to overtake Confucianism. As a result, resistance was made. It failed horribly. In result, the country split in its governments. In 1857, the French brutally forced the Vietnamese to accept their protection services in order for their possessions to be kept safe from the British. Many territories were given up, which led to the occupation of Saigon and extended their territories' dominance over Vietnam. And later, Vietnam was established as a French protectorate. Later in the 80s, that same years, Cambodia, Annam, Tonkin, and Laos failed to resist against the French army, and its new possessions were called Indochina. While the French conquest of Indochina was going miraculously, Thailand remained as the only free and untouched state of Asia, which led to the rivalry of the British and the French to escalate to a whole new caliber, since they both found interest in Thailand. King Mongkut and King Chulalongkorn prevented this massacre from taking place. Both were promoters of education and maintained healthy relationships with European powers. In 1896, both Britain and France agreed to let Thailand as an independent buffer state between their possessions in Southeast Asia.
U.S. imperialism in Asia centered around the Spanish colony of the Philippines. During the Spanish-American War in 1898, U.S. naval forces managed to gain control of the country. Under the order of President William McKinley, it was turned into a colony, giving them access to trade with China and a strategic position close to Japan. Many Filipinos rose up in resistance against the U.S., most notably the revolutionary Emilio Aguinaldo. He led guerrilla forces against the U.S. in a bloody 3-year war, but he was eventually defeated.
Sometimes a colonial power could realize its goals by cooperating with the local politicians. For example, the Dutch East Indian Company used indirect rule in the Dutch East Indies. Under indirect rule, local rulers were allowed to keep their authority and status in a new colony setting. This made access to the region's natural resources a lot easier. Indian rule was cheaper because fewer officials had to be trained, and it affected local culture less. However, indirect rule was not always possible, as some local elites resisted foreign conquest. In these cases, the local elites were replaced with Western officials. This system was called direct rule. Great Britain administered Burma directly through its colonial government in India. In Indochina, France used both systems. It imposed a direct rule in southern Vietnam, but ruled indirectly through the emperor in northern Vietnam. To justify their conquest, Western powers spoke of bringing the blessing of Western civilization to their colonial subjects, including representative government. However, many Westerners came to fear the idea that native people, especially the educated ones, the intellectuals, being allowed political rights.
Because European countries didn't want to develop their colonies' industries, colonial economies were based on the export of raw materials and plantation agriculture. Under this system, people worked for low wages, suffered high taxes, and had to endure the abusive conditions of the plantation. Although most of the profits were taken back to the colonizers, the colonies of Southeast Asia did gain some investment in their economies and infrastructure, such as railroads and highways, as well as the creation of an entrepreneurial class.
Many people were subjected to colonial rule in Southeast Asia, which led to the resentment of a whole continent. Countries like Vietnam and Burma expressed how they fought many battles, and the Hong Kong organization Save the King, which fought many internal battles. Resistance to Western domination led to the peasants revolting, who were tired of being driven off their lands and had no way to practice agriculture. In 1920, a Buddhist monk by the name of Saya San led a revolt against the British in Burma. Many resistance moves ended catastrophically, and nationalism rose as a result of that. New classes emerged which included intellectuals. They embraced the institution and values of the West. They had received proper education and spoke a vast amount of Western language and were in some way connected to the current regimes. These movements weren't focused on nationalism. It overlooked to defend economic interests and religious beliefs. University students in Burma formed an organization that protested against the persecution of the Buddhist religion and lack of cultural respect by the British. In the late 1930s, this resistance movement started to be both heard and backed up in demanding national independence.